Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I am Henry Wildberry, and today what I want to do is I'm going to be doing a long-term review of this Fitz Cyclez all-road randonneuring gravel mixed terrain bicycle. And I had this bike made custom for me. It was finished in 2018, so it was like January of 2019 when I received the frame and I started assembling it, and I started riding it in March or April of 2019, and I've been riding it a lot ever since then. I've put roughly 18,000 miles on it in that time frame. I've done multiple tours, like short one or two, well, not one day, but like 3 or 4 day tours. I've done some long solo rides. I've done a long 400K with Miss Cools, my cycling extraordinaire partner, and a bunch of stuff. I've been riding it along on my local trails, my local roads, basically everywhere that I ride normally. I ride this, and it's even opened up options for rides that I wouldn't normally do on the other bikes that I was riding in before this one came along. So I want to do a review on it. There's a bunch of things about this bike that are unique, and I'm going to talk about those specific things. This is a steel bike. It has lug construction. It's made with very thin wall tubing, so you wouldn't be able to get a bike like this off of the shelf at a bike shop. They don't make bikes this thin for production bikes, largely because the tubing is so thin that for some riders that are maybe a bit heavier, this would not work out very well for them. So there's much more stringent weight limits on bikes like this. However, custom, when you go custom, you are allowed, or your frame builder will decide how thin to make the tubing for you so that the bike will feel as light as possible but still respond and ride with a certain feel. And that will depend on the kind of riding you like to do and the terrain you ride on and all kinds of factors. And so a lot of that will get figured out when you go through your custom frame building process. Now with this one, I wanted to push the limits a little bit. I wanted standard diameter tubing when I had this frame made. And this standard diameter tubing for this means that the top tube is a 1-inch top tube and the down tube is a 1 1/8 inch. Oversized tubing means that the top tube would be 1 1/8 inch and the down tube would be 1 1/4 inch. And so this bike is really about the smallest diameter tube set you can get for building a steel frame. But on top of it, not only is it a very small diameter, which makes it very flexible, it's also very thin. So the top tube here is a 0.7 wall thickness, that's 0.7 millimeters. And then the center part where it's butted, this is a double butted tube, which means it's thinner in the middle section here where the stresses are mostly in tension and compression due to bending. You have a thinner tubing, and that is 0.5 in this case. So I've ridden bikes with even thinner tubing. They make it down to like 0.4, even 0.35 even on some very, very thin tube sets. So this frame, for my weight, right now I weigh right around 160 pounds. When I had this built, I was actually about 155, so I was a little bit lighter. But I've since put on a little bit more mass, and I think it's leg strength. I put it all in the legs. Right, Miss Cools?
Right.
Not on the belly. Not on the belly at all. It's all in the legs. But anyway, so that's kind of what the tubing specs are here. So that way you get an idea of what we're talking about. Now, some things to keep in mind. Frame flexibility will also depend on the length of the tubes. In fact, the length of the tubes will probably contribute significantly to the flexibility of the frame. And so a long bike with very thin tubing and narrow diameter tubing will be even more flexible than this one. So the other interesting feature to this bike is that it has a very, very low trail front geometry. It has a very kind of standard road bike head tube angle. I think this is 72, degrees, but the offset of the fork, or the fork rake, is 65 millimeters. And so with the 650B wheel, that sets the trail down in the low 30s. And until I got this bike, I hadn't really ridden a lot of low trail bikes, and I wasn't really 100% sure what it was going to be like. And I think of all the things about this bike, that is still the one thing that I'm most on the fence about. Like, do I like low trail or not? And I go back and forth on it what seems like a daily basis. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I'm sort of feeling that it has some benefits at certain times, and then it has some disadvantages. And when I ride my mid-trail bikes, they feel more natural to me. And then when I come back to this, I go, oh, well, it's not as bad as I thought, so maybe I wasn't giving it enough of a fair chance. But there's a lot of things that affect the way a low trail bike handles. So when you have a knobby tire on here, a really wide knobby tire, it actually slows the steering down quite a bit, and it makes it feel a little bit more like mid-trail, but not exactly. I mean, it still has that quicker steering feel, but it slows it down enough where it starts to feel okay. Also, if you load the front up, if you put weight on the handlebar bag here, or you put low rider panniers on it, or low anything cages, or you put weight on the front fork, that also helps to make it feel a little bit better. It feels a little more normal, or natural, as I will say. It feels natural. I feel like a mid-trail bike feels natural to me. Probably because that's what I grew up riding on. Most of my road bikes have had mid-trail. Even my mountain bike doesn't have significantly high trail. So I'm used to that mid-range of trail. But anyway, those things are affected by tire width, tire pressure, and the knob profile on the tires themselves. So I'm still on the fence about it. I've thought about possibly swapping out this fork and going with a little less rake and raising the trail a little bit. And the reason why I don't really like the low trail that much is mainly for on the long sections of road. I feel like you do have to manage the bike a little bit more. With a mid-trail bike, it tends to track straighter without any effort. With a lower trail bike, you tend to have to work a little bit more to keep it feeling like it's going straight. So this is the thing. This is why I go back and forth, because it's not horrible, but it is there and you do notice it. But then when you're doing a climb, like with this bike, I have the knobby tires on right now, and when I'm going up a really steep trail, it's amazing how much more control you have on the bike going up really steep technical things. I've ridden this bike up some very steep single track trails that are really rocky on a trail that I have only ever completely ridden without putting my foot down on my mountain bike, but I was able to actually do most of it on this without suspension at all. And I think it had something to do with the fact that I can easily correct little things like movements where I get bumped around, and I can control it better with this steering. But then that becomes a negative as soon as you switch and start going downhill on a loose rocky terrain. You start getting bumped around a little bit more. So it's a trade-off for sure, and I don't know. I'm thinking I'll just leave it as a low trail bike, because then I have a low trail bike, and then I have another bike coming that's going to be a mid trail bike. So we'll see. When I ride that bike for a few years, then maybe my opinions will switch on this. But for now, I'm going to leave it as a low trail bike, or low trail traditional rando bike. The low trail gives you less toe overlap. It allows you to run fenders with more clearance. So there's plenty of benefits to it. Like I said, you can load up the front. This bike, a lot of you have asked, well, why don't you put the load on the back? And the reason I don't do that is because, like I said, it's a very thin tubed frame, and any extra weight on the back of the bike causes it to be a lot more flexible and almost to the point where it's not rideable. So it's hard to go bike touring with it. But the only way that I've been able to go bike touring with it is to load it up front. Let's see. To finish up kind of my review of this bike, it's 18,000 miles. It's been flawless. I have the powder coated paint here, and it hasn't been a problem. It's very durable. It has worn a little bit here, but it's been holding up quite well. I do a lot of off-road riding. I've been riding it in the winter through the rain. I did swap out some of the components, but that's not really the review of this bike. The things that are important about this bike that make it different is that it has clearance for very wide tires. So these are 50 millimeter tires. They are a 650B. And right now I'm running the Soma Cazadero tires. These are a knobby tire with a center tread. Great tire for riding on off-road, but also good on-road. They reduce the number of flats you will get. So if you're the type that likes to blast through the gravel that's on the shoulder of the road that's full of little broken pieces of glass and you don't want to pay attention, these are a good choice for that because they have a thick center tread, and I have had 0 flats so far. They are tubeless compatible, but I am running tubes. So great tire. They have a natural rubber sidewall and a black tread. So that's kind of that's what makes them ride nice and smooth. They have a supple sidewall, as they say. Whether a black sidewall or natural rubber sidewall can be noticeable to anyone, it's probably debatable. Some people might feel it, some people won't. But overall, I would say a good tire for a long term, like if it's a long lasting tire, probably will last a lot of miles because of the center ridge on it. And you get the knobs on the sides, and I do feel a little bit better cornering off-road. And I've set a couple little PRs on this bike with these tires. On downhill, single track. Now, am I going to beat somebody on a mountain bike with this? Probably not, but you get the idea. This bike is a really multi-purpose bike. It's good for doing really long rides, but also being able to ride on gravel and mixed terrain. So it's really a multi-purpose bike. It doesn't replace your mountain bike. It doesn't replace your road racing bike. You're not going to see a lot of people building bikes like this, mainly because it has some kind of older technology. I've got the down tube shifters, the 1-inch threaded stem, but I like it. I really like the 1-inch threaded stem. I like the Quell stem because I can adjust the height at my leisure, and I've been playing around with different heights just to see what's more comfortable for me. So I really appreciate that, and I like the way it flexes. It's got a little bit more give to it than your typical clamp style 1.125" stem, which are larger diameter and much stiffer. These are small diameter, very flexible, but they give you a little bit more give on the off-road. And when you combine that with this really flexible fork, this is the most flexible fork you can get. This is a 0.8 wall. It's an oval round shape, so it does have some stiffness up here at the fork crown, but overall this fork is very flexible. I can literally see the tire moving when I'm riding it, and that's because the blades are so flexible that they can bend and allow that wheel to move around. And you'll feel it when you hit the off-road sections. You'll feel that give, and it's great. So you get a thinner, lighter fork and the flexibility that helps you ride on off-road surfaces. The trade-off is if you were to think of it as like if this was a bike you wanted to sprint out of the saddle on, you're going to be really flexible. You aren't going to want to sprint out of the saddle on this bike. It's not meant for racing and crits or road racing or any of that stuff. This bike would be good for like a long day of exploring and adventure and having fun. It's a great bike to ride down to the cafe, get a cup of coffee. It's a great bike to do your hill climbing on because it's a little bit heavier. This bike weighs around 25 pounds right now as it's standing right here without the fenders. And that's going to make you stronger on the climbs. And then when you switch back to your carbon fiber road racing bike, you're going to be zipping up the hills like you're going to feel like there's nothing underneath you. So like I think it was George Hincapie who said, train on the heavy bike, race on the light bike. Well, this would be a great heavy bike to train on. The downside though of the down tube shifters is if you are trying to do some hardcore climbing out of the saddle, you can't shift when you're standing up, and also because these are retro friction style shifters, if you're cranking really hard on this bike, I do notice that if I don't tighten this tension screw right here, or I guess it's the preload screw that loads that friction system up, if you don't get it tight enough, the frame is so flexible that it can pull the cable and it'll shift the rear derailleur into a harder gear. So you could be climbing already in a hard gear, and then it'll shift it even harder gear, and then you have to sit down and shift it back up. But if I tighten it down really tight, that usually solves the problem. But it is just something, you know, down tube shifters are not necessarily going to be a hot commodity for most of you out there, but I just wanted to mention it because it is a fun bike to have. I think it's fun to have the kind of mechanical levers to pull on, and it's just neat. It feels like you're actually, I don't know, you're right. Like, it's like driving an old car, or maybe it feels like, I don't know, maybe if you ever got to chance to drive in an old steam train or something, turning all the valves and blowing the whistle and stuff. It's fun. I mean, don't want to drive that to work every day, but it's still fun nonetheless. So that's kind of how I see these. They're fun. They are pretty practical for some reason. But anyway, that's way off topic. I'm gonna get a bunch of comments on that if I keep going on it. So we'll turn our attention away from the down tube shifters. This bike has the center pole brakes, which I've done a whole video on, and my opinions on the center pole brakes have I've just become more and more impressed with them over time. I had Miss Cools set up her bike with cantilever brakes, and we've got the Paul Mini Motos on it. And I just put on new rims on this bike because I finally wore down the front rim enough. I felt like it was time to replace it, and I went with these Head Belgian plush rims, and they have a very machined brake track, and instantly the braking was even better. And with these high leverage ratio Shimano X-Age levers combined with these center pole brakes and these pads and these rims, the braking is really good. I don't want to say it's disc brake, you know, hydraulic disc brake level braking, but it feels incredibly good. I have 18,000 miles on this bike, and in that time I've swapped out the pads I think once. There's been I initially tried a whole bunch of different types of pads, but I was only doing short rides with them. Then I finally settled in on these Cool Stop Salmon pads, and I've had this set on here for at least 8,000 miles, let's just say that. They still work perfect. I've had to do almost no adjusting. You can even see I haven't even threaded this screw in at all. The only thing that I have done is replace those pads. I have adjusted them a little bit once I took the fenders off to kind of push the pads closer to the rim and pull the caliper out a little bit. And I haven't even replaced the crossover cables. These are the original crossover cables. They're still on here. They're a little frayed on this end here, but they're working fine. 18,000 miles, trouble-free, maintenance-free, adjusting-free. I mean, I just cannot believe that I can go that long on a set of brakes and not have to do anything. Yes, I replaced the front rim, but this rim was $170. So for 18,000 miles, I now have a new rim. $170. I built the wheel myself. I used CX or Sapim double-butted stainless steel spokes with brass nipples, if you're curious. And I had never built a wheel myself before, but I did. And so far it's still true. So far, we'll see. Probably have to adjust it a little bit in the future. But anyway, yeah, so I think that covers most of it. I love this bike. It just grows on me, and I don't want to change it. I really want to leave it as it is, because I feel like this has been so honed down to something that just functions well. It doesn't need a lot of maintenance. I have replaced the bottom bracket once, and I now have a new set of bearings to go into this one. So I'm not having good luck with bottom bracket bearings, but I'm getting about a year out of them. But I have a feeling it's just because of the conditions that I ride in. I do a lot of off-road, I ride through water. I wash my bike pretty regularly. I don't probably do it the right way. I probably get too much water in there. Anyway, I'm not gonna get mad about $20 bottom bracket bearings, but I have to replace these. So that's where we're at on the bearings. I did swap out the saddle. I think I'm gonna do a separate video on the saddle. I've gotten a lot of questions about the saddle and my thoughts on it, so I will do a separate video on that. And otherwise, the drivetrain is mostly the original stuff. I have changed chain rings once, I've changed the chain a couple times, and I have changed the cassette once. That's it. I don't know what else to say. It's a great bike. I'm really impressed with it, even after 18,000 miles. I don't think I would. This is one of those bikes that, you know, I'm gonna ride it until it breaks, and then I don't know what I'm gonna do at that point. But maybe I'll have it fixed, because it's, you know, it can fix it. Actually, you can replace these tubes, and no problem. You're on your way again. So anyway, this is probably a really long video. We are now at, yeah, we are killing it. 20 minutes. Sorry everyone, but stay tuned. I'm gonna have a review on this, or I'm gonna do a saddle discussion update, because it's been a few years, and I've got some other things to talk about. I want to come back, possibly talk about the fork on my road bike with the carbon steer. I want to talk about other stuff, whatever I can think of, but maybe if you guys have some thoughts and comments, questions in the comments, I will look at those and see if any of those make for a good video. And then finally, one last thing to say before I go. We made our second donation from this channel. Thank you all for watching and watching those annoying ads, because we're using all that money. We're donating it 100% to the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. We made our second donation. It looks like we're going to have a third donation coming up. And right now I'm making about $100 a month on this channel, and it's going all to the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. What I will say is, if we do more videos, I will make more money, and that means I will give a larger donation. I'm asking, what do you guys think of me notifying you every month that I make a donation, or should I try to stack them up and do them once every quarter, like every 3 months instead? You let me know in the comments, and I will see if that makes sense. So again, thank you all. Have a great day, and we'll see you very soon.